Hello, and welcome everyone to my talk on scientific Python. As many of you know, the scientific Python ecosystem is comprised of a large collection of individually developed and maintained projects or Python packages. Many of you may know NumPy and SciPy, scientific or scikit-learn, matplotlib, and so on. And these packages have been around for quite some time. Many of them early development started in 2000, 2002, 3, early days like that. But I'm going to be talking to you instead about the Scientific Python project, which is a new effort that aims to better coordinate the ecosystem and grow the community. You can find more about it at our website, scientific-python.org. But before I tell you a little bit about the project, I wanted to get a little bit more background about why we need this project. Why with the project that's been going on for 20-some years, working well, do we need this new effort to try to coordinate things? Well, in the early days, the developer community was very small. The user community was not much bigger than the developer community. Most users were developers. And when we had meetings, they would be small groups of people, many of them from representing the various different projects. And so it was really easy to get around the table, bring out laptops, discuss things, figure out how things should go. And at this point now, the individual projects have grown a lot, and their developer communities are often larger than our entire community was in the beginning. And so it's no longer possible to sit around the table easily at the meetings. Also, many of our meetings now, thankfully we've got a really vibrant and great user community. And so our conferences now have many, many users, and there's a lot more effort in teaching people about the new projects and packages and hearing about the new efforts. And so those events no longer have that ability to let maintainers coordinate and discuss and make plans for the future. Another thing that's become more difficult is becoming a maintainer. So in the early days, there wasn't a lot of code written. There was a lot of missing functionality. Our practices were pretty minimal, and getting in and starting to work was very easy. Things have changed quite a bit. Many of the code bases have become, full of features already. They've also benefited from a lot of fixes from bugs and for optimizations, and all those bug fixes and optimization can make the code a little more difficult to read and understand. It's also the case now that, unlike in the beginning, there's now people who've been working on the code bases for maybe over a decade. So coming in and trying to get up to speed with someone who's been working on a code base for over a decade is obviously very difficult. So now that I've given you some motivation for why we started this project to better coordinate the ecosystem and grow the community, I'm going to tell you 4 main areas we're working on right now. So the first 3, we've done a lot of work already. So that's number 1, we've started supporting and develop shared infrastructure. 2, we've begun fostering the next generation of contributors. 3, we've created a coordinating forum and mechanism. And this second and third item I'm going to talk mostly about. And then finally, I'll just say a few words at the end about our plan to develop a community-vetted strategic plan. That won't really have much to say about until probably at least a year from now. And then we plan in about 2 years from now to have the published strategic plan available. Okay, so I'm not going to say much about this because I think everyone here probably understands the idea, but just a few of the items that we've done for shared infrastructure. So we've got a community calendar now that currently I believe you can find the calendar information for NumPy, SciPy, scikit-image, and we'll be adding more projects calendars to that as time goes by. We've also created a Hugo theme. That theme now is used by numpy.org, scipy.org, scientificpython.org, and most of the .org, scientificpython.org sites you see here. We've also created a discourse discussion forum. And then the idea here is this is going to be a place where all the projects can come together and talk. Because it is the case that often when you're doing work or thinking about something, as a user, you're not just using NumPy, you're using many, many tools from the ecosystem. And similarly, when you're thinking about new features and new work you need to do, sometimes that'll impact many projects, and it's a really nice place to have, instead of everyone have to join every individual project mailing list, we can join one mailing list and then use tags and categories and things like that. We've also begun a website for developer statistics. And those developer statistics, largely right now we're looking at GitHub information, and we'll be developing that more in the future. We also have a blog that is right now focusing on some core projects, so I'll talk a little bit more about those core projects in a moment, but NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, Pandas, and so on. Okay, so fostering the next generation of contributors, this is one of our big goals. And our first effort is through a social media campaign, and we're creating a series of videos, community onboarding videos, which we'll be releasing in the next week or so. And we also have the case where we've got a Twitter profile and some other online resources. And so we're hoping to use this to be able to communicate to the public and our user and developer community, but also be able to make announcements, and so people will know when things are happening across projects. And I encourage you to go and take a look at our Twitter feed and our YouTube channel, which we have a tiny URL link at the bottom you can find. These things are all linked on most of our scientificpython.org websites, so you'll see the social media icons at the bottom of them, in the bottom right corner of most of the websites. So scientific-python.org for sure. Yep, and another thing we've done is for the project itself, we've started creating new types of teams. So we've created things called community managers, and we've recruited an early group of people. And these community managers, I hope, will be growing over time, but as we add more projects and more areas, we'll also be adding additional teams. So we're starting to have an accessibility team. We have something, a spec team, which I'll talk about in a moment. There's also a theme team that's going to be maintaining the Hugo theme for the projects. We're also creating a blog team. So these teams are all places where we're hoping to have new community members join, and these are new efforts. So unlike coming into a project where there's already a huge established code base and other things, these things should be a little bit more easy to get involved with and become a new leader in the community. And so we're hoping to see many more people show up than we already currently have. All right, so this is something that I think will be of a lot of interest to people in the Python community. So we're really thinking about how to create a coordinating forum and mechanism. So the coordinating forum is fairly easy. We'll just use the discourse server we set up, but the mechanism is where we're really focusing our attention right now. So the mechanism we're going to create is something called the spec, or the Scientific Python Ecosystem Coordination Document. And these things are somewhat similar to a Python enhancement proposal or a NumPy enhancement proposal. The big difference is in all of those previous things like PEPs or NEPs, you have a specific project with a specific developer team, and they can make a proposal, and then the developer community can accept or reject the individual enhancement proposal. Here what we're trying to do is provide some sort of coordinating mechanism where you can have a design document that would be applicable or adoptable, let's say, by all the projects in the ecosystem. And so there's not really a mechanism for voting for that. And I'll tell you a little bit how we're thinking about doing that in a moment. But if you go here, we've already got 4 candidate specs that are in draft status. The spec 1, the lazy loading for submodules, is the most far along. But if you go to the scientific-python.org website /specs, you'll be able to read about the process and more information. I'll just say a few words about the process. So first, we have identified a subset of our ecosystem projects, and we're calling them the spec core projects. And these are projects that essentially provide fundamental data structures or drawing primitives or algorithms that are used by many projects in the ecosystem. And so they're imported in particular by many other projects. And they have, because of that, an informal role, and it's already setting up policy and procedures that people tend to look for. And so we've invited those groups in, and they've agreed to become core projects. So the initial cohort of core projects is IPython, Matplotlib, NetworkX, NumPy, Pandas, scikit-image, scikit-learn, and SciPy. And we're hoping to grow that list over time, but these core projects participate in a special way for the spec process, which is they are able to do endorsements. So once a spec is fully moved along full enough, then the individual core projects get involved and can endorse them once they feel like they're good projects or good spec documents. And once 2 core projects have endorsed it, we consider the draft status no longer applicable, and then it becomes an active document, and people are encouraged to look at these as recommendations they can adopt for their individual projects. We're still early in the process and working out the kinks, but so far it seems like it's going to be doable. We've also recruited a steering committee, which largely has members from some of our core projects, but we're also looking for larger community members. And this is another area where I think we can grow the community. This types of documents we're imagining for specs, just going back, minimum supported version, that's just sort of a practice. This lazy loading for submodules is more of a piece of code. API dispatch is more of a mechanism for dealing with things, and accessibility are more like recommendations for best practices. So you can imagine there's a wide variety of different types of spec documents we could conceive of seeing, and what actually becomes specs will really involve an interplay between the core projects, the steering committee, and then what the rest of the ecosystem does to adopt these. So hopefully in about a year we'll have a lot more to say about this, and we'll know how successful or unsuccessful the project is. So finally, I'll just say a few words about developing a community-vetted strategic plan. And I'm going to put this in context. So we really haven't done much work, but I'll give you the thinking, which is I really sort of see the ecosystem having 3 decades, 2 that have already happened and 1 that's coming up. So for the first decade, it was largely individual projects were driven by individual efforts and individual needs. But then in that sort of last decade we just came out of, the ecosystem really became much more widespread in its use through scientific research and academia and industry. And as these projects grew, there was a lot of maturation going on in the last decade, where projects have started developing codes of conduct and governance structures and development process and roadmaps and leadership teams and different types of teams for their individual projects. But that's not really going to be enough. And so what we think is that now we need to come up with a much more strategic way of having the whole ecosystem mature instead of just having individual projects mature. And to do that is we're going to be doing a lot of site visits and meetings and drafting documents and trying to get community input. And so this is a process that will play out hopefully in the next 2 years. And we'll be having draft documents throughout that period. And one of the main reasons we want this vision is not only to have a roadmap for ourselves, but we really need to have more funding for our projects. They started out with people being just volunteer. Recently, there's been more funding effort going in, but our community really hasn't had a huge, long track record with grants. We also haven't done any kind of large-scale strategic planning and thinking what we need. And for some of the really larger grants that we probably would want to get that might involve several projects, we're going to need to have some very clear community vetted documents to refer to when we say new features are needed. So for large scale plans, we really do need long-term sustained effort, so we're going to need funding for that. And we also need funding for increased participation, and the community is just starting to get funding. All right, so that's it. You can learn more by going to our website, scientific-python.org. You'll find links to many things there, including our blog, our Twitter account, our YouTube account, and the discussion forum. All right, thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A